Today, we're going to be doing an audit of one of the most popular websites on the internet for shopping and e commerce. The site is Walmart.com. One of the biggest things that we want to point out about this audit is we definitely found some opportunities and one might even call major issues. But this is a very challenging thing for a company like Walmart to be able to keep up with literally everything under the sun. And there are quite a few false positives that you're going to see in these various different reports. The main thing we want you to take away from this audit is there's a lot of opportunity for any company to benefit from doing regular audits. And there are some weak points that Walmart doesn't seem to be focusing on, at least with the results that they're getting. So maybe this is an opportunity for competitors, possibly even for you if you're a competitor and you're looking to gain traction within a niche that maybe Walmart is currently dominating. Ultimately, we welcome the opportunity to run audits of any site. And in particular, we're using tools that are publicly available. So we're not exposing anything that's a security risk that isn't already available publicly for someone to be able to view and access. This is a really interesting audit. It's going to show you a lot about what we've learned over 15 years of running and building e-commerce sites, processing tens of billions of dollars in revenue through our e-commerce systems, as well as others that we've worked with. We hope that you enjoy it. Let's dive in. Okay, so just to get things started with the Walmart.com website audit, the first thing we want to do is just go to the site and take a look at it briefly and just kind of get a feel for what we're going to be digging into. In this particular case, I wanted to dig into the homepage because for this particular site, as we'll show later, a huge amount of their traffic is going to the homepage. It's about 24%, give or take, in the US. So the homepage itself is a really key page from a performance perspective. In addition, we also wanted to take a look at a detail page. So here you can see an example of one of those. This is a category landing page in particular, and I wanted to see what this page performance was like compared to the homepage. Sometimes you'll see that sites will optimize single pages or parts of their site and not get the entire site. So I wanted to at least get another key page in there. Now, if we're doing a normal audit, we're going to be auditing dozens of pages and we're going to be digging into all kinds of detail. Here, we're just giving a high level of some of these key pages so we can kind of give the idea. Now, the first thing that we want to do typically is run a PageSpeed Insights audit. This is a really simple audit that we can run from Google, and Google has basically made this available so that we can see kind of overall comprehensive view of what the performance is from a user perspective and some of the details around how to resolve any potential issues. This is extremely helpful and it kind of cuts through all of the sites that are out there. I've found personally that most sites, even major sites, struggle with performing well under these scrutinous requirements that Google has put out there. Now, a lot of smaller sites have the ability to make changes and adjustments quickly and rapidly and perform better than larger companies and larger sites. Because let's face it, they're complex and there are a lot of folks that have to make changes in order to perform well with this ever changing environment. So, this is a pretty cool advantage if you're interested in ways that you can outperform a large company like Walmart. Well, here's an opportunity. Now, for someone at Walmart or for someone on, a team that's working with Walmart, they're going to want to be monitoring this at all times so they can give feedback and updates. And there's some pretty cool websites out there that actually will accumulate all of the page speed insights and run them daily or more often if you want, and provide alerts and a dashboard to show you what your overall page speed insights are for your entire website. Pretty cool stuff. Really, really helpful and granular detail on how the site is performing overall. Now, why do we care about this? Well, the first thing is this is how Google factors in a lot of ways on page performance. You've probably heard a lot with SEO audits that you're looking for off page and on page performance and audits. This is going to be a pretty large factor for on page performance. It's not the only thing, but it's definitely a big factor and it's weighing heavier and heavier as the years go on. Okay, so without further ado, here is the PageSpeed Insights mobile and desktop These are just two tabs that we can select for Walmart.com. Now, when I'm on the mobile view, you can see what this publicly available site, pagespeed.web.dev, is showing as the results. Now, I do want to point out that these results can vary depending on when the test is run. So it's possible that you're going to see these fluctuate, and that can be something that is a false negative or a false positive, depending on how you want to interpret it. Bottom line, though, is you can see there's a lot of red here, a lot of yellow, and basically there's some major suggestions for improvement. One of the first things that I want to point out here is that in a mobile view, at least according to this PageSpeed Insights tool, the time to interactive is 12.3 seconds. Now, whether or not this tool is really accurately representing the situation, that's up for interpretation. But the implication here is that it takes 12.3 seconds for someone to be able to interact with the page, and it takes 2.2 seconds for someone to be able to actually see content when they're on a mobile device. Now, there are a lot of studies today that say that if someone isn't able to use the site within 2 to 3 seconds, the bounce rate goes up exponentially. And for every second thereafter, it goes up again, continuously exponentially if the site is not loaded within 2 to 3 seconds. We normally recommend 1 to 2 seconds or less, ideally less. And this is just kind of fundamentally going to give you a competitive edge that you can deliver in the market. So this is just kind of a red flag right out of the gate that this very large company with 24% of their US traffic going to their homepage doesn't have it heavily optimized for performance when somebody loads the page. The interesting thing about the PageSpeed Insights is it does have a granular view that you can drill into with the tree map, and you can see all kinds of detailed kind of just overview of the files that are loading to drive the site's display and presentation. And one of the things that you'll see here is that just a couple of the files are taking up most of the space. Most of the actual overall file usage is just from a few of these files. Now, could these be optimized further? This would be something that we would typically open up and look at each of the individual files, especially the major files that might be taking a long time to load. So without going into the weeds in a ton of detail, this is a great jumping off point to be able to drill into a lot more detail. In particular, you can see that we have a lot of these kind of red and yellow resources. So basically, we're showing there are all kinds of recommendations to be able to show third-party resources as cache, be able to improve the first contentful paint, reduce JavaScript execution time, and it goes into particular detail around the specific files that are doing work and taking time to run. So here you can see that the script evaluation is taking about 6.5 seconds, which is pretty long. And again, the idea is to be able to use this as a jumping off point to drill down further. Now, the other interesting thing is usually we see challenges with mobile, but they also have some pretty major challenges with desktop too. So once again, this is not good as a starting place, frankly, especially since we're dealing with the fact that 25%, basically a quarter of the percent of the traffic for this site is going through the homepage. Now, we were thinking, okay, maybe we're going to get a little bit better results when we're not looking at the homepage. After all, the homepage has a lot going on. They're really having to direct a lot of traffic to different areas. So maybe we're going to get better results if we go to one of the category pages, for example. It's a lot less busy. It should be able to kind of be more niche and focused. And so we ran those results as well. Now, what you'll see right out of the gate here is there is a lot more green, so they definitely did a better job with these pages. And again, keep in mind, sometimes these results are going to vary pretty significantly depending on the servers that they're running against and some of the timing with loads that are hitting the server. Believe it or not, it's a pretty big impact, and you might feel like if you're running these reports, you're getting fluctuating results. It usually isn't because of the site generally changing that much. It's just the perceived performance is going to change based on server load and latency and that kind of a thing. So you kind of have to take enough averages of the sets of data and then get the feedback and then optimize around that. Anyway, look at the bottom kind of view of this, the overall view of this is it's not good again for these category pages. It's only slightly better than the homepage. And frankly, it's even worse in some ways whenever you look at things like time to interactive, etc. So again, there are a lot of opportunities here right out of the gate, just kind of getting started looking at a PageSpeed Insight tool that Google produces. And we generally recommend that anyone who's doing an e-commerce site and operating an e-commerce site, even if you're not optimizing for SEO, you want to look at these performance metrics because it's going to affect your end users. And most folks are optimizing around SEO in some form or fashion. Okay, so now let's take a look at some other reports that we ran and get into more detail. Okay, so with this tool, this is Ahrefs, and there's a lot that we can get into with this tool. But the biggest thing that we want you to see is that most of the traffic for Walmart.com, especially the organic traffic in particular that we're looking at here, it is going for the US and Canada, and then everything else just kind of falls off. In fact, 94.8% of the traffic that goes to the Walmart site, according to this, on the organic search side, is through the US. So then you can even click on this and drill down further and kind of see a breakdown of the US traffic. And this is pretty interesting because according to these results, and we'll just let this load for a second, you can see that they've lost 1 million organic keywords in just the last month. And if you look at this overall set of data, and let me just see if I can move it back to all countries and let that load. Okay, so you can see here that according to the all countries view, the organic traffic has dropped off significantly just in the last 30 days. So you can see it was at 185 million per month, and now it is down to 158 million. That is a massive drop off in traffic, at least according to this set of data. Now, we're not looking at the detailed analytics for this site. It's possible that there's something going on that we're not seeing. But to me, if I'm doing an audit of this site and I'm reviewing with the team, I'm going to be looking at this and looking at the factors that are driving that potentially, and just kind of looking for basic things first that we can go attack and then get into more and more sophisticated areas so that we can accumulate a plan and prioritize so that we can fix this problem. This just seems like a huge problem. If you then kind of just drill in, you can see right away that we have these 3 categories of organic keyword rankings. If you're not familiar with keyword rankings, the idea is that they can rank kind of like a golf score, the lower the better. And basically, top 1 is the first organic keyword when you type in a specific keyword phrase and you get search results. Top 1 through 3 is in the top 3 results. And usually this gets the mass majority of clicks from an organic search. Just think about whenever you're doing a search and you type something in and you click on a result, it's usually one of the top 3 results. It's definitely almost always within the top 10, unless you get really desperate, and then it might be within the top 100. So that's what Ahrefs is trying to represent. So what they're showing here is that as of the 21st of March, 2022, there were 48 million, 13 million, and 6 million respectively keywords in these various different categories. And then if you fast forward by a month, we're basically seeing declines in all 3 of these categories, and they're very significant. And if you kind of uncheck this box for the 11 through 100, you can see the visual of the declines. I mean, these are big drop offs in keywords. So what this means is the organic keywords that Walmart was getting, they're no longer getting these rankings for, and their rankings are dropping. Again, according to this report. So you can see just kind of this overall decline that's occurring of this site. And, it's a big opportunity for competitors. It's also a big opportunity for Walmart. They may just need to fix a few basic things in order to kind of take care of these problems. Okay, so now let's take a look at a little bit more detail on the site according to some other external tools and other external audit resources. We're just going to kind of browse through these and give a high level so you can see what some of these other resources are pointing out in addition to Ahrefs and Walmart audits through the PageSpeed Insights tool. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some other tools. We're just going to briefly cover these. We don't want to go into a ton of detail because, frankly, a lot of these tools are just kind of included in this audit to give you some litmus and just kind of some salt, if you will, with some of the reports that we just took a look at, so you can at least understand kind of what other reports are saying. Maybe there are some false positives in what we're looking at. So we always want to be aware of that. Let's take a look at those next. Okay, so one of the utilities that we're going to take a look at is the SEO Tester Online site. Now, I haven't particularly specialized in using this tool. I wanted to bring it in because it runs a free audit, and this can be really helpful so you can just get a litmus of what another site is saying. And I also like to run any given tool on multiple sites and competitors within the industry, because sometimes what you'll see is the tool gives a lot of negative results for everyone, including competitors who are doing really well. So you may want to just kind of take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. But I can tell you, with the data that we looked at so far, there seem to be some pretty serious issues and kind of down and to the right performance that's going on this particular web property. Now, whenever I go take a look at the SEO Tester Online report, some of the first things that I see are that they're basically just pulling in the same detail that we got from the PageSpeed Insights. So they're just kind of pulling in PageSpeed Insights here. They do have some interesting kind of detail around the content. So I want to kind of dive into that in more detail. So they're going in, I'm just going to kind of go through the main tabs briefly. They're going in and taking a look at what the Google snippet is going to appear like, and then they're offering this upsell. Overall, they seem like they're saying, no meta description on the homepage, which I would agree the meta description can be something that can be optimized. If this isn't really optimized the way that Walmart wants, it looks like it may be, but if it's something that they haven't fully optimized, then it's worth taking the time to look at. What is the meta description? In summary, this is typically going to be a signal for Google to take this and present it along with the search results. And this is typically what a user is going to see as the description section with the search results. And so here you can kind of see an example of this and a little bit more detail that these guys are explaining on their site. But the bottom line is, this is a big opportunity from a marketing perspective. This usually isn't a great signal, though, from an SEO perspective. It's usually mostly focused on a marketing perspective. The other areas, it looks like, at least on the homepage, they're getting really good kind of feedback. I can imagine that if we did this on a detail page, they would not get the same positive feedback. In particular, if we just go run this against one of their category pages, let's see what we get here. Wow. Okay, so I went ahead and took the time to run this against the category page that we're taking a look at today. And you can see that we're getting a much kind of lower rating for this particular page. In particular, look at the title. The meta title of this page is really simple. It's just TV and video, Walmart.com. Maybe that's what they want. It just seems like there's an opportunity here. The description as well could be potentially be optimized a little bit more. And just kind of overall, they're saying that the title doesn't completely match with the content. That's pretty interesting. Again, these are just kind of basic things. There's no micro data, so there's no schema.org data that they're detecting with this tool. Again, a really awesome opportunity to be able to take advantage of. They are saying that the SEO URL is friendly. I don't necessarily think this is as optimized as it could be. This particular URL has an ID at the end. Although it's not necessary to remove that, it's kind of like not that hard nowadays to get that out of the URL. And then just kind of having this random subdirectory just seems like it's not as user friendly as it could be. So there's just some basic things here that seem like they could be optimized. And we just continue to go down the page, and they're basically talking here about how there aren't passive event listeners. Just going to continue here. They're kind of talking about how it does have a sitemap and canonicals. That's good. And we'll go into the robots and the sitemap later. There were some interesting findings there too. But then also, they're also saying that there are some vulnerable libraries as far as, also there are just kind of some false positives, it looks like, according to this. So this is saying JS, no vulnerable libraries, 0. And then I guess they're saying there actually is potentially some vulnerable content according to sync.io. So you can go to this particular URL and then see what they're saying. Okay, and so they're kind of talking about this particular version of React that is running on the site. And then if we kind of continue, it looks like they're saying all the languages look fine. So that was pretty interesting taking a look at that. And then here they're saying that the H1 tags aren't optimized and there's no coherence to the content on the page. They are saying that the H2 tags are pretty good. Yeah, the URL is not optimized. Okay, so I was talking about this earlier, where it just kind of doesn't necessarily match kind of modern standards for those. And then it's basically saying the text to HTML ratio is 1.3%. So what does this mean? Basically, the mass of the content on the page is just a blob of HTML, and the actual text is relatively small compared to the HTML that's presented on the page. So this is kind of not an optimal signal. Okay, and then some A tags don't have a title attribute. So this could be an opportunity for them to optimize those. And really, you can see that we can get quite into the details. But the bottom line here is that, yeah, here, this is just coming from, it looks like straight out of the PageSpeed insights. So we already talked about this earlier. But you can see that for a major site, this is kind of scary, seeing, some of these results, at least, again, according to what this report is showing, right? And there's a really low overall kind of score that we're seeing here. Some positives, but a lot of opportunities to fix things. And then I'm not really sure we're going to get from the social. It looks like there's some potentially helpful resources here as well. So bottom line is, it can be really helpful to bring in multiple reports. This is one that looks like a nice tool that will give us some data that we can kind of include in an Ahrefs, in a PageSpeed Insights, etc. And you want to just kind of bring in multiple resources so you're not just myopically looking at one thing. Okay, so let's take a look at the next set of reports that we dug into and just kind of give us a few more examples of additional resources we can look at. Okay, so this particular report is called SEOptimer or SEOptimer, however you want to say that. This is kind of cool because I just get a really high level view of kind of what this site is recommending. And you can see this kind of visual where I can see that they're saying performance is great according to this report. So here, we're getting an A+ on performance, whereas the other reports that we ran, we didn't get that. We got really bad scores on performance. So I'm already kind of looking at this report with a little bit of hesitation, if not a lot. But interesting, kind of set of data that we might be able to dig into. It does cover usability, and that's something that we really haven't seen in some of these other reports. So let's just do a quick review and see what they're saying. So we already saw this about the meta description tag and how that was a potential issue. Here they're talking about core web vitals. This is a lot of the PageSpeed insights. So this is matching up to what we're seeing in our other reports. And then they're talking about improving on the header tags, which again, we saw in the previous report that the header tags weren't used properly or fully. So this seems to be matching up to what we've seen. They're talking about on-page optimization being better. We just hit on some of those topics. This is interesting. They're really going into keyword consistency here. And this to me makes a lot of sense to optimize because this is kind of a deeper kind of integrity type of a presentation issue within the site. So if the site's keywords aren't matching up and consistent, then this can be a pretty major problem for a search engine to be able to credibly present the content to the user. They're going to be kind of looking at this content overall with a lot of skepticism. And then the other thing is, it's kind of saying that we have thin content. So again, that does seem to match up to what we saw with some of the other reports. Okay. I don't really know that this is true, that there's no analytics data on the page. And I don't really know that that would be a problem. I guess this is mostly just kind of trying to indicate, hey, you might want to have an analytics tool, but it seems like it's not the best information there. I'm sure they have some pretty nice analytics tools running on the site. They're probably just optimized into some of the JavaScript files. And then this was interesting because we're seeing this several times that there isn't a detected use of the schema.org data on the page. Now, this doesn't mean that there isn't any elsewhere throughout the site, but it just kind of seems like a missed opportunity to not have the schema data available. So that's something that we would end up recommending digging into. And then we just get some overall kind of traffic estimates and keyword positions. And again, this is kind of what we were talking about when we looked at the Ahrefs and we looked at these kind of keyword rankings. You can see that a large amount of these keywords are kind of sitting in this group here, and these could be moved up if we make some changes and improve things. So you want to kind of look at this as an opportunity to kind of fine tune and optimize things and see if you can get these 4 to 10 ranked keywords into the 1 to 3 range. I mean, if they just did that, they would massively improve their performance on their site from an SEO perspective. So that's just an example of how I'm going to be looking at this report and presenting it to the team internally so they can understand what their opportunities are. Again, this kind of goes into more detail. One of the things that I thought was interesting is this particular report. Again, so this goes into more detail, but the bottom line is that, we don't want to take too much from this. Let's see. Okay, so the main thing that we want to point out here is that the bottom line is this particular report isn't necessarily going to be perfect, and there are going to be some potential issues. Now, I did a little bit more digging on it, and this is just such a great example because here I looked at the usability section, and you can see right away that Walmart has just blocked this crawler thinking that it was a robot. So, I mean, that's such a great example of why you want to kind of have some skepticism whenever you're running these different reports and try to get multiple sets of data. So, you don't want to just kind of condemn the site right out of the gate because here we are running this detailed review and you could hear me kind of explaining things and it's just a blocked page. So that's why a lot of this content wasn't rendering. Now, the reality is that a lot of these issues that I mentioned are still potential issues, but you do have to keep in mind that some of these crawlers are not going to be able to get past these kind of robot detection tools. And if you can imagine, there are all kinds of people like me trying to run robot kind of audits and these kind of things, and in particular, scraping the Walmart site for data. So they're probably going to be getting a lot of visits that really aren't actual visitors that they want on the site. And it could be competitors, and it could be kind of, negative visits to the site for whatever reason. I would say ours is more of a neutral visit, but there might even be negative visits where somebody's trying to do a DDoS attack or they're trying to, kind of get information from the system itself. So that's why we're seeing this, I'm sure, among other reasons, just so that their resources on their site aren't overly taxed. But obviously, if we're getting this page, then the report is really not that valuable from this particular report. Now, I should have seen this earlier whenever I was on this kind of homepage section. And I do want to point out that we didn't see this in our other reports. But if I wanted to, I could just run this report again and see if we can get, so you can see once again, this particular audit tool is not getting past the robot. I'm going to try it one more time just to see. Okay, so now they're asking me to get their premium plan. So I'm going to take a hard pass on that. I think it's a great tool. It probably just, isn't getting past this robot detection for whatever reason because of a specific way that they're trying to crawl the site. Okay, so now let's take a look at some other tools. Hopefully we can get a positive result from these other tools that we're going to run. Okay, so this next tool is Ubersuggest, and this is a really nice tool from Neil Patel and his agency that his team made. Really, really helpful because I want to be able to look at a credible resource and compare it to the data that I've been getting so far. Again, just kind of as an example, we might be getting a robot denial page and just a basic CAPTCHA whenever we're trying to run these crawls. You don't want to forget about that. That could be a potential just kind of false negative, if you will, with some of this data that we're getting. So this is showing the organic monthly traffic and organic keyword numbers. And I think this is interesting because we're showing 93 million organic keywords. And if I go back over here to the Ahrefs report, they're only showing 53 million. So there's definitely a distinction here between, what their numbers are. And this is why you want to just continue to note that this could be something with the reporting tool as opposed to the overall functionality of the site or issues with the site. The reporting tools are not perfect. So you're going to want to consider multiple resources and kind of weigh them against each other so that whenever you are doing these audits, you're not just kind of chasing your tail, as it were, because the reporting tools are just showing random data or there's kind of an unsophisticated interpretation of where the data might be sourcing. Ultimately, I can tell you though that consistently across the board, this particular site is getting some pretty low results for some of the load time and visual stability and interactivity whenever it comes to mobile. So if you kind of switch it to the mobile view, you can see that we're just kind of seeing a lot of need for improvement on the mobile side of things. On the desktop, it's a little bit better, but still, kind of the site speed issue is something that I would strongly recommend taking a look at. That seems to be consistent no matter what across the board. And there do seem to be some other detailed issues that are opportunities that the site can improve on. Okay, so let's keep digging into some of these other tools. Okay, so this is another tool called SEO Site Checkup. And this is pretty interesting because this one gives us some other data where they're kind of citing issues. I think you'll see a lot of these issues are matching up with what we were talking about earlier. So I made the comment about the friendly URLs. We already commented about how the keywords are not necessarily matching the content on the page. This was interesting because they're saying that the non www page and the www page are not resolving to the same URL. Essentially, there isn't kind of a 301 or something in place, at least according to this tool, that would resolve that issue for a user. And for a search engine, the search engines are thinking that there are two separate pages, one on www.walmart.com and then just walmart.com. Definitely not ideal. And then render blocking resources. It's not serving images in totally optimized formats. They're saying the load time is about 5.84 seconds, and the size of the page is quite large. So the average size of a page is 33 kilobytes. This one has 157 essentially. And then they also kind of go into some warnings. Yeah. And so overall, this is pretty interesting. You can drill down into the report. And one of the things that was pretty interesting about this report was this heading tags test. And so the interesting thing was there are a ton of H2 tags, and they're saying use 10 or less H2 tags. Now, this may be something that they're trying to hack or that they're trying to kind of take advantage of that they know works. But it seems almost like it's possible, at least, that they just kind of put everything into an H2 tag for some of their categories and some of these lists. And man, that just seems like it's sending a signal to the search engines that they may not want to be sending. Okay. And that's just an easy thing to optimize potentially. Same thing about the SEO URLs, and we'll just kind of go through. They're saying that it's using inline CSS styles. That's not necessarily bad nowadays. Yeah, okay, so they're saying the top 100 most visited websites in the US passed this test. I'm not really sure. Okay, so we would have to look at this in detail, but inline CSS isn't necessarily the end of the world if we're doing it to just show CSS that applies to that page. There's a lot of kind of opportunity to performance tune around not loading external CSS and just doing page only CSS. So that's kind of an interesting opportunity. It's a little bit more advanced. I'm just not sure what this tool is detecting. If it's like just really hacky inline CSS, then that's definitely not good. And they're saying that the page actually has some console errors that are caught. That's pretty interesting. So if you go and look and we run this page and look at the console, this is what they're talking about. So you can see that there are errors that are showing up on the site. Okay, so now whenever I run it again, no errors. I'm just getting warnings. So that is interesting. So depending on how I ran it and when I ran it, I didn't get the errors. And I would be interested to see what that was that caused that. That might have just been some maintenance going on the site. I'm not sure. But ultimately, you don't want to condemn a site. Sorry, let me get back to the right report here. You don't want to condemn a site just based on one particular test, and you don't want to assume that it's necessarily correct. I'm not trying to, say that you don't want to pursue these things to their ends. You do, but you want to make sure that you actually verify them in reality as opposed to just seeing it on a test result. And then again, we kind of talked about some of these other topics. I would just encourage you to consider using multiple tools and multiple resources. And I mean, there are a lot of opportunities that seem relatively simple for them to take advantage of and resolve. So this is kind of the reality. I mean, this is a huge company. And if you think about what you're doing in your particular segment, segment of e-commerce, you can take advantage of opportunities like this from large companies that don't necessarily put the time in, or they just don't have the resources focused in this way to be able to optimize their site completely and continuously over time. It takes a lot of work and attention to detail. And so this can give you opportunities to outperform in your particular niche and in your particular space when you're dealing with a 10,000-pound gorilla within the e-commerce space. Okay, so let's keep diving in. And now we're going to take a look at security next. Okay, so on the security side, we're not going to go crazy with detail here because this is security and we really don't want to give away or kind of help perpetuate any information that would kind of present a risk for a site. This would be something, though, that if we were doing an internal kind of audit on behalf of a client or working with someone who requested a complimentary audit, we can run more advanced tools and kind of give confidentially information about security risks that we can provide. These are just kind of light scans. These are definitely not going to be comprehensive, but you can see right out of the gate, I went and ran a tool on the Pentest-Tools.com website, and we found a few mediums that came up. So you can see there's an insecure cookie setting. It's missing the HTTP only flag, insecure cookie setting, missing the secure flag, and then insecure cookie setting domain too loose. Okay, now this is kind of a medium level recommendation. So the idea is that we could pretty easily go fix these, and it doesn't seem to be, according to this site, presenting a major security risk at this time. So now let's just kind of keep going. This particular analysis with sync.io is showing that there are some security header issues that are high severity in this particular case with the content security policy. So this kind of goes into detail on that. They also gave the overall score of the site a D, and let's see if we can get to the full report. Okay, so they did a web page test. And this looks like it's a whole test, a detailed test. Yeah. And so then we can look at the security portion. Okay. So they're kind of linking these two tests together. But yeah, so you can see kind of this goes into a lot of the detail that we talked about earlier. I really like this waterfall view. This is pretty cool. So you can kind of see all of the stuff that's loading on the site. It is extremely verbose as far as the content that's loading. And I'm kind of jumping around here going out of the security side of things, but this is a really cool presentation of this waterfall. And let's see, it would be interesting if we can drill down. Yeah, there we go. So you can actually drill down and see how many seconds it takes to load everything. You can also see this in just kind of browser testing tools as well, developer tools. But this might be really helpful to present just kind of as a report for someone who's not familiar with everything, maybe a non-developer, etc. But yeah, as you can see, all these files take a long time to load and they just kind of accumulate on top of each other. A lot of them seem to be images and that kind of a thing. And this is a lot of what's taking a while to load. You can also see the connection speed. Really, really cool view with the different domains that are in use. So if there's a particular domain or file that's taking a long time to load, this would be an opportunity to fix that. Okay, so now let's go back to the security score since really we don't get a whole lot more detail, it doesn't seem here. Basically, the bottom line is that there are some libraries and there are some just basic security headers that look like they're causing a D score here for this particular site. Okay, if we keep going, this particular test with ImmuniWeb shows the site to have a score overall. And then you can see that there are some issues that they found. So let's dig into those. First of all, they're saying that they discovered subdomains and there were some issues on those. So that's kind of interesting. Help.walmart.com. Maybe an opportunity for someone to kind of backdoor into the system if they're not careful at Walmart. So, according to this site, that's an opportunity to dig into. Let's see, just kind of moving on. There's outdated software, they're saying, in particular, the Next.js and the React are just running on older versions. Whenever you're running a site like Walmart.com with as much traffic as it's getting, it really does make sense to keep things updated. So this is an interesting thing that these versions are relatively, at least according to the version numbers, they appear to be somewhat outdated. This is probably an opportunity for a hacker who's really advanced. If they found vulnerabilities in these older versions of software libraries, then they're probably going to be in a position to potentially take advantage of that. So that's why you want to keep everything up to date. There really are constant vulnerabilities that are discovered with older software. So just upgrading tends to help. They're also kind of talking about the cookie disclaimer. So no cookie disclaimer was found on the site. Now, this could be an indication of a really sophisticated IP lookup or something of that nature. I don't necessarily think that's the case. You can see a lot of their traffic is US traffic. But it is interesting that this particular site doesn't seem to present the GDPR cookie tracking notices unless I missed it. So that is an interesting kind of note here. And they're marking this as a warning. They also talk about how some of the CMS or components seem to be outdated for PCI DSS compliance. I would want to challenge that without digging into it in detail. I don't really know exactly what they're saying here. So we would just want to dig in and make sure that's actually correct. We looked at the HTTP header issues earlier. So that does seem to be a consistent issue. Content security policy, again, that's something that we saw on some of the other audits. And yeah, so you can see this again, this kind of goes into a ton of detail. And they're even looking at external content privacy and security. And so they're basically saying that these external domains didn't resolve ultimately. So that's also interesting. This could be causing a problem for the site. If this is a correct audit, it looks like it is. It looks like it's trying to download these files and it's just failing. So these look like images here. And this looks like it's a generator of some kind that's just not firing fully. It could be because this is an audit tool. So it's not necessarily a positive, kind of failure here. It could be a negative, like it's not a real thing. I would want to dig into it just to verify. It's definitely worth digging into, though. Okay. So it looks like this is a pretty positive result from a security perspective, but there are some issues that they're going to want to take a look at just to verify and confirm. And so I would end up recommending that pretty strongly that there be a detailed audit on the security side of things. Okay, so the next bit that we're going to go into is we're going to actually do a dive into some of the actual content itself on the site and just kind of do like a check of the robots file and the sitemap and kind of look at what we see just by auditing the site in detail. I think you're going to find this pretty interesting because a lot of sites don't necessarily take care of the basic details whenever the entire site doesn't have as much resources going into it or as many resources going into as it maybe should. You can kind of find these little telltale signs, and I'm going to kind of talk about that next. Okay, so this next section was pretty interesting. So what we did was we drilled down into a particular item and then just did some digging around that specific item so we could look at the code itself and just try to look at what someone would search for and find on the site if they were going through and just naturally browsing. And we got to this backpack, the Fuel Legacy Deluxe Classic Backpack Purple. And one of the things that I like to do is just kind of a basic check. I like to go on to Google and other search engines and just kind of type in those keywords and see how this site ranks. So Kroger is actually beating out Amazon and Walmart. And that's pretty interesting that Kroger is ranking higher than those two. So if you're doing some analysis of, basically long tail optimization, obviously you want to prioritize high payoff items. This maybe isn't one, but you can see that maybe Kroger is going to be doing something, and obviously probably Amazon that Walmart isn't. Now, one of the things that I'll note here is it does look like Walmart has a pretty good command of the schema data and some of the information that they're getting to show up here with this result. So that seems to be a positive sign. Here you can see that Amazon does a great job with this as well. So they're bringing in product dimensions, department, ratings, and all of that is coming in into their organic search results. So this is coming from schema data and basically properly organizing that onto the page. So kudos to Walmart. They did a pretty nice job here, and they're even getting their picture there too, which is pretty cool. So again, Kroger has a better search result, but they don't necessarily have all the schema data figured out. So, it's kind of interesting to go look and see what they're doing on this page that's different. It actually seems like a worse detail page, at least at first glance. And you can kind of see the title that's on the page. I would say that's probably what's getting a better result. It could be the title. It could be the way that they've set up their category structure that's supporting this page. But that is really, really interesting that Kroger gets a better result. So anyway, then we wanted to kind of look at the actual source code for this page. And so we're going to just go in and view page source. And, this is a audit of the site. This isn't just kind of us looking at SEO reports. We want to actually audit the detailed kind of nuts and bolts behind the site too. So we pulled this file, and you can see this is a pretty nicely organized file. It looks to be pretty decently optimized. So we went ahead and formatted it in a way that's easy to see. And the very first thing that I could say is you can see some positive signs about how we're doing DNS prefetches at the top of the page. That's pretty cool to see that. We're doing some preloads of the fonts. That's good. And then we've got these kind of scripts that it looks like they run. And this seems to be some kind of a beacon. So this is probably the analytics tool that the Walmart team is using, would be my guess. And you can see they've got their own kind of custom script that they're running at the in the head section. Now, normally you don't want to run JavaScript in the head section. This is probably pretty optimized and lightweight. And they're probably doing something. Yeah, you can even see it says lightest. I wonder if that's like their production version is like their super lightweight version of this. But I'm guessing this is making a callback, and we could look at that by doing an inspection of the network stack and just seeing. And once again, here's that little console error. It looks like just Google Ads is having trouble connecting. And then this other thing, it looks like another ads tool. So these guys are getting dinged for console errors from Google Ads, and then also this Pixie. So that's pretty rough whenever you get dinged for external resources. But that's something you're going to want to be aware of in general. So anyway, these guys are doing some collectors and GraphQL calls. I'm just trying to see if I can find the call there for that lightest beacon. And so this would be something that I would look into with this beacon script that's running at the top of the page, just to kind of see how long this is taking, if it's actually running and what it's doing. And you could look at this with the XHR request or attached to the code and just kind of dig into it. Just kind of continuing down the page, you can see that we do have some nice schema data here, which is cool. And we also have the title, which looks not horrible. And then you have a description. It looks like this was actually updated, which is kind of cool. So that's interesting that the date, it's currently the 19th. So I'm wondering why this is set to Thursday, April 7th. So that's interesting that that's in there that way. Okay, so the reason that this date is April 7th is because that's whenever we downloaded this page. So you can see that's kind of interesting that they're actually marking this with the date. That's kind of an interesting approach to this. And here you can see the images for the site are coming from this i5. It looks like at least part of the imagery. And man, that is a crazy URL for the image itself. I'm not saying that there isn't a specific reason, but it seems like there could be an opportunity there for a slight improvement on SEO to just use a friendly file name for the images. So that just seems like a basic opportunity. And then, okay, we have a lot of JavaScript files that are getting deferred, but they are sitting in this header section. So these appear to be chunks of content. And normally I would go into this. I don't want to waste your time kind of digging in, but the summary would be that I would want to look at these JavaScript files that are trying to run in the head, even though they're deferred. It just seems like those tend to cause issues with search engines. They don't necessarily respect or work perfectly with the defer. Okay. And then you can see the content, and there does seem to be a pretty small amount of just kind of fluff before we get right to it with the actual content. So that's pretty cool. Sometimes you'll see with sites that there's a lot of fluff HTML before you actually get to the page's contents. So here we have all the product information, and it looks like these are different images. And then we have these kind of related departments or links down here. So that seems fine. And then here is the meta information, the schema information, or at least some of it. Actually, this looks like data that they're using. This isn't necessarily schema. So this looks like data that they're using on their site. So they're just kind of loading a blob of JSON onto the page. Wow, that is a lot of content. Okay, so this is kind of a interesting opportunity probably. Why is all of this loaded onto the page? This seems like a really, really heavy, yeah. I don't know that I would load all this onto this page unless it's being used somehow. I would be surprised if all of this is actually used on this page. It seems like there's a lot here that is just kind of unnecessary. So this would be something I would want to review with the development team and say, hey, let's look for a more efficient way to load this data, and bring some of this data in asynchronously only as it's needed. It just seems like there's a lot going on here that is just kind of cluttering up the page. Now, I don't know this is really going to hurt the search engine results, or the performance on the page if it's done in a certain way. But it just seems like an opportunity, especially at the scale that they're operating at, to be able to kind of reduce the load, if nothing else. Okay, and then the rest of this seems to be okay. It's kind of after the body is loaded here. And yeah, again, there just seems to be a decent amount of stuff going on. They have a lot of trackers and that kind of a thing. And then that's about it. Okay, so yeah, I think ultimately you can see why the page is taking a while to load. It looks like there's just a lot going on. And unfortunately, they probably just have to make some choices here to resolve some of these page performance issues. And you can see when you look at the code, you can physically see these big chunks where there are opportunities within the code itself. Okay, so now let's do a deep dive into usability and kind of get into some of the nuances around usability. Okay, so this is a pretty interesting tool. This is a web accessibility evaluation tool. It's called Wave. It's at wave.webaim.org, and or WebAIM might be the right way to say that. Wave.webaim.org. And this is really, really cool. So you can see, I can get a summary view. And essentially, there appear to be 4 contrast errors and 10 alerts. And otherwise, this is kind of showing a pretty positive result overall for the site. And then you can see reference opportunities and structure. Just a really cool tool that we can show. You can turn the styles off so you can just kind of see the things, the errors really fast, or turn the styles on so that you can visually kind of see what's going on within the page. So here they're saying there's a contrast error. And so that would be kind of the biggest failure according to this tool. And then they're saying there are redundant links, very small text, underlined text. And so typically with accessibility, you're going to want to take advantage of or resolve the issues that are even medium when you're at the scale of a Walmart.com. So even though these aren't major issues and they could be argued either way, this kind of a tool makes sense to run quite often, and really to have it run a automated report against the entire site, and then just kind of keep ongoing as a cadence, fixing these issues that come up on the site and constantly being aware of them. Just showing that you are fixing these issues and that you're working on them with a process can be really helpful if you have any kind of frivolous claims for accessibility that aren't really valid claims and intended to just get you to settle, to be able to pay out, for litigation that someone's filing around accessibility. And unfortunately, the accessibility rules do get abused quite often to get folks to settle. At least that's what I've read and seen and experienced with a handful of kind of clients that have gone through these kind of shakedowns that can occur with accessibility. But the reality is like accessibility is a major issue if you're actually trying to legitimately use a site that's really important, and it should be able to serve you if you have accessibility issues. So you've got to be aware of the realities of the situation with actually serving those who really need to be able to use the site, and also dealing with folks out there who are just kind of trolls, frankly, and they're constantly looking to get a win or shake you down from an accessibility perspective. I can imagine that Walmart is aware of this and they have a team that's probably dedicated to this. For smaller companies, it's probably really helpful to know that you can use tools like this and they will run automated reports and keep you and your team apprised so you can fix anything that comes up that's a really, kind of big miss for accessibility. And this can really help prevent any kind of major litigation as you continue to scale and grow your business. Okay, so now let's take a look at a couple other accessibility tools. Okay, so this particular tool is called accessibilitychecker.org. Now, we just wanted to point out that we do have accessibility tools that we purchased and use internally at Clarity. But ultimately, we didn't want to go into too much detail because this is something that's pretty straightforward to kind of understand in general. There are tools that will audit the site for accessibility. There are different levels of accessibility that make sense to audit for, depending on kind of how prevalent your site is. In general, the idea is that the site needs to be accessible, and you need to be able to comply with accessibility requirements. And this can be a really sticky issue for businesses that aren't aware of this whenever you're presenting your content on the web. It's a legal issue that can come up for your business. So you'll want to be constantly considering this and looking at it. And frankly, if you can take advantage of it as an opportunity to improve, there really can be genuine benefits to folks who have accessibility issues and need to use your site, but also user experience opportunities that you can continually improve on your site from a user experience perspective while you're addressing any accessibility issues. You can kind of make it a positive, even though it's sometimes quite challenging to comply with all the accessibility rules, and they can seem contradictory because in some cases they may be. Ultimately, the bottom line here is that this particular tool found the site to be compliant in general. And there were some related kind of secondary issues that they pointed out. So you can see there's a list of these issues, and then there's kind of detail on what makes sense to resolve it or what automated tools they're recommending. They're kind of going into different websites that do accessibility audits. And again, they show these kind of detailed issues. There's a long list here, but ultimately, this is something that the internal team at Walmart is probably already constantly working on. And if you don't have a team that's doing this internally, you probably at least want to leverage a tool that can run audits and send monthly or weekly reports to your development team or to you individually if it's that small of a group, and just make sure that you're constantly aware of what's going on. And really, with that, we're going to wrap up this audit of the site. We really appreciate you taking a look at this audit of the Walmart site. Okay, so this concludes the audit of the Walmart site. We really hope that you got a lot out of this. In particular, we hope that it opened up your kind of general perspective on the credibility of third-party reporting and how sometimes there can be issues that occur. And that's just a reality whenever you're trying to run audits against a site. You can get some false positives that occur within those reports. Hopefully, you got to see ways that we can bring the data together and just kind of validate it against itself whenever you have multiple sources. And this can be a really powerful way to make sure that you're not kind of putting too much weight on a single set of data. And ultimately, the other big takeaway that we hope that you got from this is kind of vectors of looking at a site, kind of angles and directions of kind of auditing. And this certainly doesn't go into everything that we would do in an audit, but hopefully it gives you a few pieces of information and kind of directions that you might take with your audits. And of course, finally, we just want to say thank you for watching this. If you have any suggestions or thoughts, we'd love to see your comments in the comments section below. And if you're interested, we do have complimentary audits that we'll conduct for you. And if you want, we can publish them, but we will otherwise keep them private and share them with you as a complimentary audit. You can take a look at our website and we'll put links below. And if you would like and subscribe, we certainly will appreciate it. And we'll see you in the next video.